Well, actually, we're straight into the Q&A. But is this available to UK companies then?
It is available for any organization, any company. The advantage of that, some of the company mentioned, I'm sure they have been operating in the UK. So indirectly, when we assess Total Energy and Shell, and I can confirm what Saul mentioned in terms of being then advanced and looking throughout the value chain of the same way that you're in Europe. Indirectly, of course, UK can benefit from the fact that some of these organizations are reporting it from a global perspective, but is available to any organization that want to look into this. And again, as to mention, this is a free program thanks to the FIA Foundation support. There is no cost associated, at least in this first part of initial phase of the project.
So get in quick while it's still free then.
Sorry.
So I said, so companies should get in quick while it's still free at this stage.
Yeah, sure.
What I wanted to pick up in your presentation, which really struck a note for me, was that one of your slides, it said occupational road safety is still seen as a matter of behaviour of an individual driver, not linked to the organisation that performs contracts, purchase the transport, and you know, this is an international issue. I think it's it's the same in the UK, and you know, we like to think that we've got some of the safest roads in the world, although we haven't sort of done much for a while. But I think this is a massive area that companies need to address. Is that it really is sin. Once you've passed your test, therefore all I need to do is give you a vehicle and point you in the right direction. And what you see with leading companies is that actually they take that more seriously. They take, what vehicle do we give them? How do they travel to, from A to B, all those options, and what are the risks involved? So, yeah, so thank you for your presentation. We'll bring in the other presenters if we can. So, yeah, Saul, Tavid, yeah. So one thing that struck me from Mick's presentation is he mentioned that his insurance for his fleet had dropped by 35%. And that just suddenly struck me as that's quite a good indicator of where he is, or his company is, in performance. Because actually, if we knew how much it was costing a company to insure their vans, actually that would be a good indicator of where they're sitting in this. And Saul, on yours, you did that presentation where they actually did an assessment of what they thought the risk would be. So how many miles traveled or how long before actually a fatality is likely to occur. So actually you could almost have that thing where a company says, right, this is what I'm doing and these are the risks, and this is my prediction, this is my insurance quote. Do they match, and where do I sit in this sliding scale of actually I'm at the top end or I'm at the bottom end? So do you think that would be feasible? Can companies work out what their risk is?
I mean, in theory, that's what the insurers are doing for them. The real issue is working out what your problems are, and then working out where to target them. And I liked what Phoebe was saying earlier about not having a complete no blame culture, because that leads people to not have any consequences for what they do. But I think you do need to have no blame investigations. So we've worked with quite a lot of companies where the purpose of the investigation is purely to work out what happened, and also to work out what the company could have done to prevent it happening. And sometimes that is putting in clearer information on what the consequences of breaking the rules are going to be. Sometimes it's communicating the rules book, even if what's caused it is the driver breaking a rule. And so once you've worked out what your problem is in the first instance, then putting in place what's the word I'm looking for? Interventions. Putting in place the interventions which are going to address that issue, and then sitting back and looking again. All too often, you find that people will throw a whole load of interventions at the problem all at the same time, and your crash problem is improved and your insurance reduces, but you don't actually know which of the things it was that was the cure and which were the things that you could have saved your money on.
Yes, and actually, did any have a negative impact that's
Yeah.
weakened some of the better ones, sort of thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the questions we've been asked, and can I encourage people to put some in the chat, because I haven't got very many, so it'll leave it to me to ask lots of questions. So someone said, Phoebe said that backup systems were needed. No one has a backup in place with written no phone use policy unless an app or software is taken on board. So why is there resistance to this? So I think this comes back to the mobile phone use policies, and so the evidence is obviously any kind of phone use is dangerous. Hands-free is still legal, but not necessarily safe.
Yeah.
And from an organization point of view, that safe part is perhaps should be the driving factor, where they should actually be able to show that it is safe if they're going to do it, or how they can do it safely. So is there anything you can sort of say about that?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly if various companies have put in restrictions, including app-based sort of software solutions to stop people using their work phones. The problem that can sometimes result in is that people will then start using their private phones for work calls. I did some interviews for a company where one of their guys said that the company he previously worked at, who have a really good international reputation for safety, to the point where they actually go and do work for other companies on their safety, even though they're a petrochemical company rather than a producer, rather than a safety consultant. But he said, when we were there, they put a ban on mobile phones, and instantly everyone just started using their own phones, because we've gone beyond the days where people had limited numbers of minutes and all that kind of stuff. So most people are on unlimited sort of calls, so they just switched to using their own phones. And it's very difficult for an employer to say, right, not only am I going to put this app on your work phone, but I'm also going to put it on your private phone. And are people then just going to get another private phone that they don't tell the employer about? So you can use that as an extra line of control, but you also need to win the hearts and minds and get that communication over of, actually, if you wouldn't drive over the drink drive limit, if you wouldn't drive under the influence of cannabis, why are you putting yourself at this level of risk? And finding out what the key drivers are for those individuals. So again, some work with an agrochemical company, and they said, we tried for 5 years to ban mobile phones and driving. And in the end, it was explaining to the marketing department that actually the phone calls that their salesmen were making were of lower quality because they were making the call whilst driving. And they just went, oh, why didn't you tell us that before? And just banned it instantly.
And I think some of this comes down to data. So depending on the size of your organization, the chance of you having a crash involving someone using a phone could be quite low, but it's still there, but you won't know it until it actually happens. And then it's at that point too late, sort of thing. So I think this is where trying to gather national evidence is really important. And it seems these, like the petrochemical, the rail and stuff, they have a better system of joining all the individual organizations up to share that data, whereas the road industry as a whole seems very fragmented and doesn't necessarily share that data to say, actually, it is a problem, sort of thing. So
I think there's an understanding in.
Yeah.
Go on, Tavid.
I was going to say, add something. There's also a conflict because companies are using phones as a method of actually giving information. So there's working practices, there's a whole range of information which come through your work phones. So it is a difficult one to resolve. And Saul's quite right. There are apps out there that help you to make sure you're not actually using your phone while driving. But employers are increasingly using phones as a method of communicating with their workforce, including their drivers. And so it is a bit of a conflict. And I think organizations have to look at this a lot more closely and understand that new technology is great, but there are limitations, particularly when it comes to driving for work purposes. And perhaps that needs to be a focus as well.
Okay. Luca, from an international sort of perspective, sort of phones, handheld, hands-free, what sort of advice and issues do you come across?
Maybe I will bring in the fatigue dimension. One of the elements of the index is also for companies that are producing safety-related products, is also to get a better sense of performance of the product itself. So, for example, Honda can estimate how many fatalities and accidents are occurring in Honda cars in Japan. So we give the opportunity to organization to reduce the sphere of influence, and Honda, for example, started working on the only Japan market. And when they realized they were not able through in-vehicle technology to detect fatigue of the drivers, and they immediately sent a message because they couldn't get to the 3 or 4 point maximum of the question. They immediately sent to the research team and to their management the information so that they can start finding out solution to manage this. So I think it's these kind of programs, in my view, can bring case studies and can bring a specific solution like the ones that Mick presented earlier, for example, and can be moved across organization. And from the cell phone use, I'm sure Shell and Total Energy are similar policy to prevent drivers from using, and I'm sure they have way of controlling this and take action if they realize that the drivers are using the personal phone, for example, and that's the power of organization and be on the front line of making sure to reduce any potential risks for their own drivers.
Okay, brilliant. And we've got a question in. So what does the panel think about how organizations can use their supply chains through procurement requirements to improve cultural safety maturity?
Well, if I can start, I'm the UK because tomorrow there is the Euro NCAP truck safety program launched here in close to Birmingham. And for the first time, corporation will have a reference to select heavy vehicles on trucks for their fleets. So there is a clear role in introducing in procurement reference to having this kind of program so that we are sure that the latest technology and the safer vehicle are put on the roads. And part of what we're doing also outside Europe, where there is no reference, of course, is try to have evidence on which could be the safest vehicle can put. And if you take example from the oil sector, and I'm sure Sol can confirm this, we found out that the Total Energy and Shell, they deploy the same vehicle in Africa and south of France and the UK and the USA. No matter of the local regulation, that's the standard they set. That's the standard they have throughout the value chain. So we have to probably encourage more organizations to adopt this kind of approach because you will have an immediate impact in our view.
Yeah, the vehicle standards issue caused a lot of debate over the years in the oil and gas industry, and you'd have people saying, "Well, those vehicles aren't available in country," and the answer would be, "Well, there's all sorts of things that if the country is just establishing an oil industry, drill pipe isn't available in country. There's a whole load of technical stuff which is not available in country, but you import it." And you pay the cost of importing it. There was a project in northern Kenya where we turned up for an audit, and they basically anything that had 4 wheels and would still move had been deployed on this project, and it was part of their kind of contribution to the local economy of we're employing local drivers with local vehicles, and this is all great. And we sort of went through and said, well, something like 60% of them didn't meet spec. So we said, okay, these ones you can use with additional controls in place. These ones you just can't use at all. By the time we left the country I think we left the country on the Friday, and by the Wednesday we got a complaint about us from a Kenyan MP, which I should put on my CV. And the company said, okay, well, we need to fix this, but rather than going for it's impossible, we'll do a deviation from standard, they set up a program for the local community where the company bought vehicles that were compliant. The company then leased those vehicles to the locals as part of their contract, and then at the end of the contract they went away with a new vehicle which eventually made its way into the local second-hand market as a safer vehicle, and the operation had a fleet of safe vehicles to use for the operation. So it's the old, when there's a will there's a way, and it can be done. And I think very often organizations are nervous of putting requirements on their contracting community, because they say, no, actually one of the benefits to us is it's all arm's length and the responsibility for XYZ lies with them. But actually, if you're the client, you are in a position to dictate. And if it's safety grounds, then, if you really are committed to safety, if safety is an imperative for you, if it is your number one priority, as so many boards say it is in a policy, then actually why wouldn't you? There are problems, but they're all manageable. And if they're manageable in northern Kenya, they're definitely manageable here.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, like, if you think about direct vision standards in this country, if companies, coming back to that sort of quote that was in there about, occupational road safety still is about for the driver, not the company as such, that possibly is why companies aren't demanding safer vehicles, because, that was led by Transport for London because of the fatals, not companies saying, do you know what, we're having too many fatal crashes. What we need to do is have a system where our drivers can see better. And that, even in the UK, where we still think we're good at this, companies don't seem to be leading it to say, great, that's 5 stars, but actually I want a 6-star one. I've still got a problem with X sort of thing. Because that's what I'd love to see, is actually companies saying, yeah, that's a nice 5-star, but actually what I really want is something better, to drive it from that way. And to me, that's what companies, should be doing, sort of thing. But hey ho, we're not quite there. Right, I've got another question. So are there examples of accessibility, actual traffic safety footprint documents created by organizations? So I think, is that sort of them saying, this year we expect to only kill one person because we've got these vehicles and we're driving this many miles, or perhaps that's not not as clear. But do you know what I mean? It's based on those risk factors that you had, you could say, well, actually this year we expect to, or in the next 10 years we expect there'll be 2 fatals.
There are quite a lot of, again, within the petrochemical sector, there are quite a lot of companies who will publish in their corporate social responsibility report or in their sustainability report, they'll put in a paragraph about land transport safety and how many fatalities they've had over a period of time. They don't necessarily put in what they're trying to do about that. And there are some where, certainly under the previous guidance, and I have to double check what the current guidance is, but the fatalities that needed to be reported to IOGP as the industry body were employees and contractors. So if your contractor left the road and hit a tree and died, that went on the industry stats. If your contractor ran over a local and they died, that didn't go on your stats. Now the better companies obviously were still counting and still reporting on those, but yes, it was one of the flaws in the system that I've taken issue with on a number of occasions.
Yes, I suppose it's what are you recording, and it's like work-related road collisions aren't really all reportable, and within the rail industry they can be followed up by ORR. But in the wider industry, wider sector, they're not necessarily. So the motivation for some companies seems to be reduced because of that. But some companies, petrochemicals, seem to sort of actually don't need so much of a stick. They've seen that the advantage of it and why they're doing it, sort of thing.
They're also good at looking at high potential incidents. So one of the things which again doesn't happen with our system here, in terms of UK as a public organisation kind of thing, there was a a bus full of school children, which crashed not very far from me, ended up on its side. No one seriously injured. And it's just like, oh, well, that's brilliant. Now, if that happened in the oil industry, that would be treated, the investigation for that would be treated as seriously as a fatality, because it's a high potential incident. So any rollover, even if no injury is involved, it counts as a high potential incident. And they would throw resources into investigating that, and that goes into annual reporting. And there is IOGP do publish on an annual basis motor vehicle collision stats for the industry as a whole.
I remember that incident, and I was just thinking, even if someone had died, the investigation would have been around legality. You know, is there one person to blame, namely the driver or another driver or something?
Yeah.
Not what happened and how do we stop something similar to again, because we got off lightly this time. It was a very small ditch, not a larger one. It wasn't flooded, because it could have been very, very different. And what I don't like is that we won't necessarily learn from that incident. You know, it will be ticked down to, wasn't that lucky? You know, a few broken bones, few thingies, stuff like that. Not, you know, this could have been a bus full of dead children. And you know, what's going to change? And I think that's where it comes back to this cultural maturity. If nothing's going to change, then we're not very culturally mature. If we can say that happened and we were lucky that it was, you know, like this, and it didn't happen a mile down the road where there's a, you know, something else. And that actually what we're going to do is we're going to do these things, and it won't just stop this bus falling off. Actually, it will benefit lorries and cars and everything else. And I think that's where we need to get to. So ideas, how do we get there?
Jamie, if I may add on this question, we were quite impressed with Waymo in the US. Waymo is preparing for the Road Safety Index, and they have been preparing all the accreditation stuff, but they have been publishing openly all their driverless activities they have in 5 US cities, with all data, with benchmarking with the normal driver. So I understand that also in the UK, driver automation is a hot topic and it will become more and more. So I would encourage to visit the safety hub of Waymo, which is very dense of information and data, and they disclose all the fatalities or small crashes that they have in at least in these 5 cities where they've been operating.
Yes, and ideally, what went wrong and what was corrected afterwards, sort of thing. Because I think that's what we're missing, is that loop of, you know, this happened. I know there was like one of the independent self-driving vehicles. Someone had fallen down in front of it, so it didn't know they're there, and it then tried to get itself out of the way. What you like to think is that won't happen again now, because you know it happened once, and you know we learn from that and we move on. But I think the worrying thing with the road sector is you know, we know that there will be a someone at work who's drunk, who's driving a vehicle, you know, that is using a mobile phone, that isn't wearing a seatbelt, and that we're not moving those forwards.
Right. And for clarification, our program doesn't show this kind of numbers. So the idea is to understand if they are aware and what they do once they have. So the rating reflects this approach. Is not intended to publish how many fatalities or money crashes an organization has in the value chain. That's not what we want to do, just to avoid this kind of approach that you mentioned now.
Okay. Just before you move on, Jamie, I've noticed that in the chat there's a thing from James Risdale about dash cams and the impact on driver behaviour, and concerns within his organisation about dash cams and staff surveillance. There is a video which we're going to be circulating through the PACTS forum for companies who lead in road safety from Mighty, which is around, they had a driver who was really anti dash cam, and his manager was really anti dash cam, and he had a crash, and it was the dash cam that actually proved that he was doing the right thing and was completely blameless. And within sort of 24 hours, he'd had a phone call from the police saying, no further action against you, don't worry about it. And so it's that kind of thing which we can promote, and we can make sure that you get a copy of that.
Yes. So yeah, it's pushing the actual advantage of this, and coming back to it, it's where actually, if there is an incident, it's often the driver that's blamed and held accountable, and they'll be the ones that
Yeah.
lose their license and stuff like that. So actually, sometimes it stops them doing the things that they might try to get away with, but actually in the long run, it's actually good for them and other drivers. There was another question which I will do quickly, which was I think I got the question slightly wrong. So they were referring to the FIA Road Safety Index, examples of organisations that have followed their process. So do you track improvements and stuff, Luca, on they started at one place, they took on your index, and actually they're now improved that and then can demonstrate it?
Yeah, we will be tracking this at the moment. At the moment, they are all very good company. We have been in touch, and we suspect this because they want to get in when they are ready to go through a sort of audit. But the program will go up to 5 levels next year, so there will be opportunity to also monitor the plans that they have and the overall culture of safety, so how much they can apply this concept throughout the operation. Because at the moment we have give the opportunity to limit the application to a specific business unit or to a specific country or to a specific market. But they will have the chance to go through the rating and the points and understand how they can improve over time.